So for a long time, I've been wanting to do this video of my precious mother so that her great-grandchildren and children and even grandchildren will know what her life was like. So, Mother, tell us what your earliest memory was. What was the thing that sticks out in your mind as to your earliest memory of almost 94 Kanahara years ago?
My earliest memory was I must have been under 3. We were moving to, and my parents were moving to an apartment in Bensonhurst. They were looking for an apartment. And they left my sister and I in the car while they went in to look at the apartment. And I was very unhappy being left in the car. And they told us not to move. And I decided that we're going to go in the house to get out of the car. Well, the first thing I did was fall on the ground. And my parents had to come out running. And that's my very earliest memory, because we did move into that apartment. And that's where I had polio. And I was 3 when I had it. So I must have been very young.
So tell us what life was like. I mean, now we have these mega stores like Costco and Walmart and Target. We have all of these giant stores. So tell us what it was like when you were a child. What kind of stores did you have, and do you remember what prices were like?
Well, I wasn't in charge of the money, but I know it was pretty cheap. My father, during the Depression, would give my mother 50 cents a day to buy food for all of us. And some people didn't get the 50 cents, so it was pretty inexpensive. I know they had a grocery store, and then a separate fruit store, and a separate bakery. All the stores were separate. And when you go to buy milk, you would take your milk container and they would ladle it out from a big, gigantic urn of milk, and they would put it into and I think it must have been about 2 or 3 cents.
Was it pasteurized?
Yes, it was pasteurized. But it wasn't homogenized.
Was there a cow in the back of the store?
No, they didn't have homogenized milk. Then later you bought a bottle of milk and the cream was on top because it wasn't homogenized.
That must have been yummy.
Yeah, you would take the cream off and use it. And if you bought, they used to have these big tubs of butter in the store. And if you wanted a 1/4 pound of butter, the grocer would take a knife and cut off a piece, and sure enough, it was a 1/4 pound. They would weigh it.
So it wasn't packaged the way it is today?
It wasn't packaged, no.
So what about cheese? Was it packaged like it is today?
Oh, no, nothing was packaged. Nothing was prepackaged. When you went into the candy store, which was my favorite place,
I understand.
They had a showcase full of different candies.
They didn't have barrels?
No, it was like this candy store that I went to, because when I went to school, we would come home for lunch, and then on the way back to school, my mother would give me 2 cents so I could stop at the candy store and get the candy.
What did 2 cents buy you?
2 cents bought me a lot, because you could buy for a penny too.
Oh.
So they had these little Indian babies and the nonpareils and the licorice. All that was a penny. And they had picks. They had a box of I guess they were mints, chocolate covered mints. And they were a penny a piece. But if you picked the pink one, you got another one for nothing.
Oh my. So did you ever pick the pink one?
Probably not.
So that was. And were there horse-drawn carriages that would go up and down the street?
Yes. Occasionally. There was always horse manure in the street. And the iceman would come and yell ice. He had a horse-drawn carriage, and you had an ice box.
You didn't have a refrigerator.
Didn't have an electric refrigerator. So he would carry the block of ice on his back up 2 flights of stairs.
Wow.
People worked very hard.
Nothing was automated.
Nothing was automated. You had to keep a drip pan under the ice box so when the ice melted into it. And things were not as cold as with a refrigerator.
So you probably had to go shopping every day.
Yeah, they would go shopping very often. My mother did that. I didn't do that.
While you were in school.
When I was a young housewife, I saw my first supermarket.
We're not up to that yet.
Oh, okay.
So then you were a child, so you moved around a lot during the Depression.
Yes, because
tell everybody what it was like during the Depression. What was life like?
Well, we children didn't realize there was a depression. We played with things that were free. We used to play Potsy, and you used a banana peel.
Tell them what Potsy is.
Potsy was a game with, I think there's another name for it, I don't remember. But you put boxes and you had to go to each box. You were onesie, you had to aim
You drew boxes with chalk on the ground.
Right.
Yeah, there is another name for it. I can't think of it either.
Yeah. And then you had to throw the marker into the box. And if you threw the marker into the box, you advanced to the next box.
Right.
But you had a hopscotch is what they call it.
Hopscotch, right.
Because you had to hop around all the boxes.
Right.
But you didn't buy the marker. You used a banana peel for it. That was the best marker. And then you would jump rope. That was an old clothesline that you used to jump rope. And you would play hide and seek. That you didn't need any items for. And the boys used to build these scooters with an old box from a fruit store and half of a roller skate. And so children didn't realize we were living in a depression.
Did you not see people begging in the street or any of your family homeless? Like
well, my
extended family?
grandfather used to come around. He had 6 children.
Which, is this your paternal?
My mother's father. And he would, each child, he'd go once a week to each child, and they would give him a meal and 50 cents.
So who
so
were...
he had his 50 cents.
What was his
So,
name?
Joseph.
So-
I called him Papa.
Joseph was your grandfather. And tell us what your parents' names were.
My mother was Lillian, and my father was Charles.
So Lillian had 5 siblings?
There were 4 girls and 2 boys.
So
My
what were
mother
their names?
Was the youngest of the 4 girls. And Bertha was the oldest. Poor Aunt Bertha. She had 4 children, and her husband died when he was in his 20s. At that time, there was no Social Security, nothing to help. So she had to put the, I think she put the 4 children in an orphanage and went to work. And then she took the 2 girls out. And one of the oldest boy, never wanted to speak to her because he was left in the orphanage.
Oh, how awful. This was during the Depression?
That was during the Depression.
So that was Aunt Bertha was the oldest, and then who was next?
Then there was Aunt Ada. And she had 3 daughters. My 3 cousins.
Who I know you were very close to as a child.
Right. There was Selma, Elaine, and Norma. Norma was a year older than I. Selma was the oldest. She was a beautiful girl. Really beautiful. And she died young.
How old was she when she died?
She must have been in her 40s.
Oh, okay. And then, so Aunt Ada, and then who was next?
Aunt Blanche was next. And Aunt Blanche had a girl and 2 boys. And she had a stationery store, they called it a stationery store, in New Jersey. And that was my favorite place to visit.
What's this, describe what it looked like.
Well, first of all, the ride there was no bridge. It was before the George Washington Bridge was built. So we had to take the ferry across.
The Hudson River.
The Hudson River. And it was at the Palisades. Mountains were there. They were beautiful. It was really very pretty. And
did they have Palisades Amusement Park?
They had, that was one of the reasons I loved to visit. They used to keep a poster in their store window, so they got free passes to Palisades Amusement Park.
Wow.
So, and then you could get all the ice cream you wanted
at their
store.
Well, so describe what their store was like.
Well, it was a luncheonette. My aunt made egg salad and tuna salad, I guess chicken salad. I know she made pickles.
Is that where your love of chicken salad came from?
And they would make sandwiches, they would sell sandwiches. And they lived above the store.
But they also had candy there too, didn't they?
They had candy and they had ice cream.
Oh, wow.
And ice cream sodas, which is something you don't see today. Ice cream sodas were delicious.
And what kind of candy did they sell?
Well, I don't really remember the candy. I guess it was chocolate. But what I do remember is they had a pinball machine that paid off money. It paid off nickels.
Oh, my.
And it was illegal, but they had it in the corner. And they made a lot of money from that machine. A lot of money. A lot of money at that time would be $50.
No. And they lived upstairs?
They lived upstairs.
Okay, so that was Aunt Blanche.
And then came my mother.
Yeah.
And then Uncle Nat, who had 2 sons. And Uncle Harry, who had a son and a daughter. My cousin Ruthie.
So you had lots of cousins.
We had lots of cousins. Every summer we would rent a place in the country up in the Catskills. It was a bungalow, or you shared a kitchen, and you stayed for the summer. And the husbands would come up weekends. The fathers and the husbands would come up weekends.
So what would you do at this bungalow colony?
Well, I remember there was a river that we went swimming in. It was a lot of fun. It was, the water would be flowing, and you would be in the river.
Was it cold?
It was cold, it was clean. There were a lot of rocks. And then you played with your cousins, you played, I don't know, you always found something to do. Or
So
else you bugged your mother.
Right. Well, the times haven't changed that much. So then, World War II. Tell us about, well, first of all, tell us how you met my father.
Well, I worked in the Brooklyn Army Base, port of embarkation in Brooklyn. I made $1,440 a year.
A year.
A year. That was a pretty good job.
How old were you?
I don't know, I guess I was about 20.
And you were so pretty.
Yeah. But I didn't like the job. It was during the war had started, and that's where the soldiers left, were shipped off.
So why did you not like the job?
Because I didn't have enough to do. I was in the personnel department, which is now called human resources.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't such a change in personnel. But what I had to do was go around and try to get the new people to buy war bonds. And that's how I met your father. He had been in England installing radar, and then they came back to this. It was sort of like this electronic things that they made at the department that I worked in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a shop where the guys were working on this equipment. And I had to go in from the office and try to sell them war bonds.
Okay.
So your father said he'd only buy war bonds if I would go out with him.
What a flirt.
So I didn't like it known. Everybody knew already, and I broke the date.
You did go out with him?
No, I didn't go out with him because I broke the date because everybody in the office was talking about it, and I didn't like that.
So you agreed to go with him?
I agreed to go with him.
And then you changed your mind?
Then I changed my mind.
Okay, and then what happened?
And then what happened was he was drafted and went into the service, and he wrote to me.
How did he get your address?
Well, I don't really remember. I suppose when I was going to go out with him, I gave him my address for him to pick me up.
So he started writing to you before, and you had never even been on a date?
Right.
So he was smitten.
Right, he was smitten.
Why didn't he just email you?
Or text me.
Or text you?
Right. So when I got the letter from him, I don't remember whether it was a card or a letter. I answered him because I felt, he was in the service.
Right. He felt obligated.
Yeah. And he wrote the most beautiful letters. I fell in love with his letters, really.
How often did you hear from him?
Very often.
Where was he stationed?
He was stationed in South Carolina, in Columbia, South Carolina. And then it started to get very romantic. Then he came up for, they got a leave, a furlough, they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And he came home and we went out. And we really fell in love with each other. And then he went back to Colombia, and then he was going to be shipped overseas. So he wanted me to come down. They had a month before they were going to be shipped.
Where was he going to be shipped to?
Overseas, he didn't know where. They didn't tell you. They did what they wanted.
And this was during World War II.
This was during the war. So I think we were engaged by this time. I got a ring.
That didn't take very long.
No,
How long had you been communicating?
I guess it was close to a year that we were seeing each other.
Well, you weren't really seeing each other. He was.
Yeah, it was mostly by mail.
And so you agreed to go to South Carolina.
My parents wouldn't let me go alone. I had to take a chaperone with me.
And who did you take?
So Aunt Ida came with me.
And tell everybody who Aunt Ida is.
Aunt Ida was his sister.
Had you
She was single.
You had met the family, obviously.
Oh, I had met the family. Yeah, I went there for I met them. I guess he came in for Passover. The first time I met them, and he took me to the Seder at their house, and I spilled the wine. I remember. I was very embarrassed.
So being clumsy is nothing new.
And he had an uncle. I wore a new coat that I had bought. It was really a beautiful coat.
What
Spring
color was
coat. It was fuchsia, I guess.
Fuchsia.
And his uncle was a tailor, and he wanted to feel the material. He says, "How much did you pay for it?"
Do you remember how much you did pay for it?
No, I don't remember how much I paid for it.
And that's the first time you met the family?
That was the first time I met the family.
So tell us about my father's family.
Well, he came from a family of 8 children. And Florence was the oldest. There were 6 girls and 2 boys. And Florence was the oldest. Then there was Uncle Saul. So they had a girl and a boy.
But they kept going.
But they kept going. And then they had Aunt Helen, and Aunt Lily, and Aunt Jeannie, and Aunt Ida. and then your father. And this was all in Europe, in Poland. And they decided to come to America, but they didn't allow them in. There was a quota system.
Because they were Jewish?
Well, depends what part of the world you came from. If you came, they try to keep out a lot of Jewish people.
What year was this?
This was, I think, 1928.
So how old would my father have been?
Well, your grandmother was pregnant with your father when your grandfather left because they couldn't come directly to America. So he went to South America. He got in through South America. He went alone, and he left your pregnant grandmother with the 6 other children. And he was in South America, I don't know, for about 5 years.
So I may have relatives in South America.
Yes. And then you met them when we went to Israel.
Right, yes I did.
Then he came up to New York and he opened up a grocery store and he got an apartment and sent for them. And this time your father was already 7 years old.
And he had never met his father.
He'd never met his father.
Wow.
And then they had another baby. They had Aunt Esther.
Right.
She was the only one born here.
Right.
I don't remember. That's it for today.
Okay.